There's a particular kind of terror that comes not from being seen, but from being read. Not your face, not your body, but the unfiltered landscape of your thoughts, the raw, unedited truth you only dare whisper to blank pages in the sanctuary of solitude. Emma knew this terror intimately. She'd spent 27 years perfecting the art of hiding in plain sight, of smiling professionally while her heart screamed sonnets, of keeping every dangerous feeling locked safely behind the neat penmanship in her leather-bound diary, until the day she sent page 47 to the one person who should never have read it, until the day her most guarded secret landed in the inbox of the man she'd been dreaming about every single night. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you feel it was worth your time, consider becoming a member for early access to upcoming stories. Your support means everything. The offices of Hartwell Industries occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower that pierced the Seattle skyline like a shard of ice. Emma had worked there for 3 years, and she still felt the same flutter in her stomach every morning when she stepped out of the elevator into the reception area with its polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a living painting. She was an executive assistant, though that title felt both too small and too large for what she actually did. Too small because she essentially ran the entire executive floor, managing schedules, coordinating deals worth millions, smoothing over conflicts before they reached crisis level. Too large because, at the end of the day, she was invisible. A efficient, pleasant ghost who kept the machine running while everyone else took credit for its smooth operation. She didn't mind the invisibility. In fact, she'd cultivated it carefully, the way some people cultivate gardens. She wore muted colors, soft grays, and quiet blues, nothing that would draw attention. She kept her dark blonde hair in a neat bun, wore minimal makeup, spoke in measured tones. She was competent, reliable, forgettable, exactly as she needed to be. Because the alternative, being seen, being known, was too dangerous. People who were seen got hurt. People who were known got rejected. She'd learned that lesson young, and learned it well. But there was one place where Emma allowed herself to be reckless, where she permitted every wild thought and desperate feeling to run free. Her diary. It was burgundy leather, soft from years of handling, filled with pages and pages of her unfiltered truth. She wrote in it every night before bed, and sometimes in the mornings over coffee, and occasionally during lunch breaks when the feelings got too big to contain. She wrote about her dreams, her fears, her observations of human nature. She wrote about her childhood, about the father who left, about the mother who stayed, but never really saw her. She wrote about her few failed relationships, the men who found her too intense or not interesting enough, too much or not enough. And lately, for the past 8 months, she wrote about him. Alexander Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Industries, heir to a commercial real estate empire, and the most compelling, frustrating, fascinating man Emma had ever encountered. He was 41, 14 years her senior, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes the color of slate on a stormy day. He was tall, lean, always impeccably dressed in suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He was brilliant, demanding, occasionally impossible. He expected perfection, and usually got it. He rarely smiled, almost never laughed, and when he looked at you with those penetrating gray eyes, you felt like he could see straight through to your bones. Emma had been assigned as his personal assistant 2 years ago when his previous assistant quit after a particularly brutal quarterly review. Everyone in the office said he was impossible to work for, that he went through assistants, like some people went through coffee. But Emma found, to her surprise, that she didn't mind his exacting standards. There was something clean about his expectations. He didn't play games, didn't do office politics, didn't waste time on false pleasantries. He said what he meant, and meant what he said. And beneath the cold exterior, she sometimes glimpsed something else, a loneliness that matched her own, a guardedness that suggested old wounds, carefully hidden. She started writing about him 4 months into her assignment, small observations at first. He takes his coffee black, no sugar, and always drinks exactly half the cup before his first meeting. He taps his pen 3 times against his desk when he's thinking. He has a small scar above his left eyebrow that he got from, I imagine, some childhood accident. He's left-handed, but wears his watch on his left wrist anyway. The observations grew more detailed, more personal. She noticed that he stayed late every night, that he rarely took lunch, that he never mentioned friends or family. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when someone disappointed him, the way his eyes softened almost imperceptibly when she brought him his afternoon coffee without being asked. And then, slowly, dangerously, the observations became something else. Confessions, fantasies, dreams. Page 47 was written 3 weeks ago, after a particularly long day when they'd worked until midnight, preparing for a board presentation. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and for just a moment, he'd smiled at her. A real smile, tired, but genuine. And Emma had gone home and filled 3 pages with everything she'd been trying not to feel. I dream about him every night, she'd written. Not even proper dreams, just fragments. His hands, the way they move when he's explaining something complex. His voice, how it drops lower when he's tired. The way he looks at me sometimes, like he's about to say something but changes his mind. I dream about what it would be like if he saw me. Really saw me. Not as his assistant, not as the person who organizes his schedule and brings his coffee, but as a woman. As someone who understands his silences, who sees past his armor, who knows what it's like to be lonely in a crowded room. The day everything changed started like any other. Emma arrived at 7:30, a full hour before Alexander, which gave her time to review his schedule, prepare briefing documents, and generally ensure his day would run smoothly. She made his coffee the way he liked it, arranged his morning correspondence in order of priority, and settled at her desk outside his office to tackle her own endless task list. He arrived at 8:30 exactly, as he always did, wearing a charcoal gray suit and carrying the leather briefcase that was probably older than she was. "Good morning, Emma," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. "Morning, Mr. Hartwell," she replied, handing him his coffee and the day's schedule. Their fingers brushed for half a second during the exchange, and Emma felt that familiar electric jolt that she absolutely could not acknowledge. He glanced at the schedule, nodded once, and disappeared into his office. The door clicked shut behind him with its usual finality. The morning proceeded normally. Emails, phone calls, a conference call with the London office that she managed, while Alexander reviewed contracts. At 11, she reminded him about his lunch meeting with a potential investor. At 1, she organized the documents for the afternoon board meeting. At 3, she brought him fresh coffee and noticed he looked tired, that the line between his eyebrows was deeper than usual. "Everything all right?" she asked, and immediately regretted it. She wasn't supposed to ask personal questions, but he looked up at her, and for a moment, something flickered in those gray eyes. "Long night," he said simply, reviewing the acquisition proposal. She nodded and retreated to her desk, her heart doing complicated things in her chest that she refused to examine. At 4:30, her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Maya. "Coffee tomorrow. I need to tell you about the disaster date from last night." Emma smiled and texted back a quick yes, then opened her laptop to finish the quarterly report that was due by 5. She'd been working on it for 3 days, compiling data from every department, creating spreadsheets and graphs and executive summaries. It was detailed, meticulous work, exactly the kind of thing she was good at. She saved the document and opened her email to send it to the entire executive team. But her laptop was acting strangely. The cursor kept freezing, the screen flickering. She'd been meaning to take it to IT for weeks, but hadn't found the time. She clicked on the attachment icon, scrolled through her recent documents, selected what she thought was the quarterly report, attached it to the email addressed to the executive team, including Alexander, and hit send. The little whoosh sound confirmed the email was gone. She exhaled in relief and closed her laptop. Another task completed. Another day survived. She was packing up her desk, preparing to leave for the day, when her phone rang. Alexander's extension. "Yes, Mr. Hartwell? Could you come in here for a moment?" His voice was strange, careful, too careful. Emma's stomach dropped. She grabbed her notepad, though she had no idea why, and walked the 10 steps to his office door. Knocked twice. "Come in." She entered to find him standing by the window, his back to her, hands in his pockets. The evening light slanted through the glass, turning him into a dark silhouette against the glowing city. "You wanted to see me?" He turned slowly, and Emma's breath caught. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something intense and searching and impossible to interpret. "I received your email," he said quietly. "The quarterly report?" She felt relief flood through her. "Good. I hope everything is in order. I triple-checked the numbers and it wasn't the quarterly report." The words hung in the air like stones. Emma's mind went blank. "I'm sorry. I don't understand. You sent your diary, Emma." The world tilted. The air left the room. Emma couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he'd just said. "What?" The word came out as a whisper. "Your diary. Or at least, several pages of it. Page 47 was particularly—" He paused, and she watched his throat work as he swallowed. "Illuminating. No, this couldn't be happening. This was her worst nightmare, her absolute worst fear realized." Emma's hand started shaking. She gripped her notepad so hard her knuckles went white. I don't, that's not." But she couldn't form a coherent sentence because her brain was too busy replaying every mortifying word she'd written. The dreams, the observations, the confession about seeing him, really seeing him. "It appears your laptop auto-saved it to your recent documents," Alexander continued, his voice still carefully neutral. "An easy mistake to make." Easy. He called this easy. Emma wanted to disappear, to evaporate, to cease existing entirely. "I'll resign," she heard herself say. "Effective immediately. I'll clear out my desk and—" "Emma!" Her name in his voice stopped her cold. "Look at me." She couldn't. She physically could not make herself meet his eyes. But his voice came again, softer this time. "Please." Slowly, like lifting an impossible weight, she raised her head. He was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not disgust, not pity. Something else entirely. Something that looked almost like wonder. "Don't resign," he said quietly. "I need to think about this. We both need to think about this. But don't run." Emma's throat was so tight she could barely speak. "You read it. You read all of it." It wasn't a question. He nodded slowly. "Page 47. About your dreams." His voice dropped lower. "About how you see me." The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Emma's entire body was trembling now. Adrenaline and mortification. And something else. Something dangerous flooding her system. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I never meant for you to." I would never have— I know, he interrupted gently. I know you wouldn't have sent it intentionally. Emma, go home. Take tomorrow if you need it. But don't make any decisions tonight. Don't resign. Don't run. Just think. She nodded because she couldn't do anything else, turned mechanically toward the door. Her hand was on the handle when his voice came one more time. For what it's worth, I don't think you're alone in those dreams. Emma didn't remember getting home. She must have ridden the elevator down 42 floors, must have walked through the lobby, must have caught the bus that took her to her small apartment in Capitol Hill. But she had no memory of any of it. She was on autopilot, her mind too full of white noise and panic to process anything as mundane as transportation. When she finally closed her apartment door behind her and leaned against it, the full weight of what had happened crashed over her like a wave. He'd read her diary. Alexander Hartwell had read page 47, had read her confession about dreaming of him every night, had seen straight into the most vulnerable, unguarded part of herself, the part she'd spent her entire life protecting. Emma slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, her back against the wood, her knees pulled to her chest. She felt exposed in a way that went beyond embarrassment. It was as if her skin had been peeled away, leaving every nerve ending raw and oversensitive to the air. This was why she'd built her wall so carefully. This was why she'd learned to be invisible, to be professional, to keep her feelings locked safely away where they couldn't be used against her. And in one moment of technological failure, all of it had crumbled. She'd learned early that being vulnerable was dangerous. Her father left when she was 6, walked out one Tuesday morning and never came back. She remembered watching from her bedroom window as he loaded suitcases into his car, remembered the way he never looked up at the house, never glanced at her window. Years later, her mother told her he'd said he felt suffocated by family life, that he needed freedom. But Emma, even at 6, understood the real message. She hadn't been enough to make him stay. That lesson crystallized into a core belief. If people saw who you really were, they left. In high school, she'd had a crush on a boy named David. She'd written him a note, pouring out her feelings in careful handwriting, and slipped it into his locker. He'd read it aloud to his friends at lunch. Their laughter had echoed across the cafeteria, and Emma had learned another lesson. Expressing your feelings made you a target. In college, she'd dated a graduate student named Marcus for 6 months. She'd thought maybe this was different. Maybe she could let her guard down. One night, lying in his narrow dorm bed, she'd told him she loved him. He'd frozen, then carefully explained that he wasn't looking for anything serious, that he thought they were just having fun. She'd learned then that even when you thought it was safe, even when someone seemed to care, vulnerability could still get you rejected. So she'd stopped being open, stopped hoping, stopped reaching out. She'd perfected the art of pleasant competence, of being helpful without being present, of giving just enough of herself to function in the world while keeping everything important locked away. The diary had been her compromise with her own heart. She could feel things, experience things, want things, as long as she never, ever shared them. The pages were safe. The pages couldn't laugh at her, or leave her, or use her feelings as ammunition. Until today. Until her treacherous laptop had betrayed her, sending her most private thoughts directly to the one person who could hurt her most. Emma finally stood up, her legs stiff from sitting on the floor. She moved through her apartment like a ghost, turning on lights, setting down her bag, going through the motions of normal evening routine. Her apartment was small but carefully arranged, books everywhere, organized by author and then by color. Plants on every available surface, thriving under her careful attention. A window seat overlooking the street where she often sat with her diary and a cup of tea. Everything in its place, everything controlled, everything safe. Except her. She wasn't safe anymore. She'd been seen. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Still on for coffee tomorrow? I'm dying to tell you about the guy who showed up to the date in Crocs. Crocs, Emma." Emma stared at the message for a long moment, trying to imagine explaining what had happened. "So I accidentally sent my diary to my boss, the one I've been secretly in love with for months, and he read all about how I dream about him every night, and now I have to quit my job and possibly move to another city, or maybe another country." No, she couldn't tell Maya, couldn't tell anyone. This humiliation was too complete, too overwhelming. She texted back, "Rain check? Not feeling well." Then she turned off her phone, made a cup of chamomile tea she didn't drink, and sat on her window seat staring at the darkening street. His last words kept echoing in her head. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're alone in those dreams." What did that mean? Was he trying to be kind, trying to soften the blow of her exposure? Or did he mean something else? Something that made her heart race, and her breath catch, and her carefully constructed walls tremble? No, she couldn't let herself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope got you hurt. But even as she tried to shut down that treacherous feeling, her mind kept replaying moments from the past 2 years. The way Alexander sometimes watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his voice softened when he said her name. The time he'd worked late with her on Christmas Eve, and when she'd finally packed up to leave, he'd said, "Thank you, Emma, for everything. I don't say it enough." The way he never yelled at her, never spoke harshly, even though she'd seen him tear apart other employees who disappointed him. The way he always seemed to know when she'd had a hard day, appearing with her favorite tea from the cafe downstairs without a word. Emma didn't go to work the next day. She called in sick for the first time in 3 years, leaving a voicemail on the main office line at 6 in the morning when she knew no one would answer. Her voice sounded strange even to herself, thin and brittle like old paper. She spent the day in her apartment, moving from room to room without purpose, unable to settle, unable to think clearly. Every time she tried to plan her next move, her mind circled back to the same impossible loop. He read it. He knows. He saw everything. By evening, she'd convinced herself that resignation was the only option. She couldn't face him, couldn't sit at her desk just outside his office, couldn't pretend that everything was normal when he'd seen straight into her soul. She drafted the resignation letter 3 times, each version more formal and distant than the last. "Please accept my resignation effective immediately. Thank you for the opportunity to work at Hartwell Industries." Cold, professional, revealing nothing of the chaos inside her. She saved it to her desktop, planning to email it first thing in the morning. But sleep didn't come easily that night, and when it finally did, she dreamed of gray eyes and voices saying her name and doors closing that wouldn't open again. The next morning, Emma woke before dawn, with a clarity she hadn't felt in days. She couldn't resign by email. Whatever else she wasn't a coward. She'd built her entire professional reputation on competence and reliability. If she was going to leave, she would do it properly. Face to face. She would hand Alexander her resignation, thank him for the opportunity, and walk out with whatever dignity she could salvage. She dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, a navy suit that made her feel armored. She pulled her hair back so tightly it made her scalp ache. She applied makeup with precision, creating a mask of professional composure. If she looked put together, maybe she could feel put together. The bus ride to the office felt like traveling to her own execution. Every block closer made her chest tighter, her breath shallower. But she forced herself forward, step by step, through the lobby, into the elevator, up 42 floors. The executive floor was quiet at 7:30 in the morning, most people not arriving until 8 or later. Emma walked to her desk on legs that felt like water, set down her bag, and pulled the resignation letter from her folder. She could see light under Alexander's door. He was already here. Of course he was. The man probably never left. She stood there for a full minute, holding the letter, trying to gather courage. Just knock. Hand it to him. Leave. Simple. Except nothing about this was simple. Her hand was shaking as she raised it to knock, and she hated that visible sign of weakness. But before her knuckles could touch wood, the door opened. Alexander stood there, looking like he'd had as little sleep as she had. His tie was already loosened despite the early hour, his hair slightly disheveled, dark circles under his gray eyes. When he saw her, something flashed across his face too quick to interpret. "Emma, you're here." His voice was rough, careful. "I wasn't sure you would come back." She held out the letter, her hand steady through sheer force of will. "I wanted to resign in person. It seemed more professional than an email." He looked at the envelope, but didn't take it. "Come inside, please." "Mr. Hartwell, I don't think—" "Please," he repeated, and there was something in his voice that made her throat tighten. She stepped into his office, and he closed the door behind her with a soft click that seemed too loud in the silence. The space smelled like coffee and the subtle cologne he wore, leather and cedar. Familiar scents that had become comforting over 2 years of working in close proximity. She stood awkwardly in the middle of the room while he moved to lean against his desk, arms crossed, watching her with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. "I read your diary," he said, stating the obvious. But she heard what he wasn't saying beneath the words. "This needs to be addressed. We can't pretend it didn't happen." "I know," Emma replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's why I'm resigning. It was unprofessional and inappropriate, and I've put you in an uncomfortable position." "Uncomfortable," he repeated, and there was something almost like bitter amusement in his tone. "That's one word for it." He pushed off from the desk, taking a step closer. "Emma, do you know why I've never dated anyone from the office?" The question caught her off guard. "Because it's unprofessional? Because everyone here wants something from me. Access, promotions, money, connections. Everyone has an angle." Another step closer. "But you never have. In 2 years, you've never asked for anything. Never tried to leverage your position. Never played games." Emma's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I don't understand what this has to do with—" "You wrote that you dream about me every night," he interrupted, his voice dropping lower. "That you see past my armor. That you understand my silences. That you know what it's like to be lonely in a crowded room." He was close enough now that she could see the silver in his hair, the exact shade of gray in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened. "Emma, do you have any idea how long it's been since someone actually saw me? Not Alexander Hartwell, CEO. Not the heir to the Hartwell fortune. Just me?" Her breath caught. "Alexander. I've read page 47 17 times in the past 2 days," he continued, and there was something raw in his voice now, something vulnerable. "I've memorized every word. And the thing that terrifies me is that you wrote exactly what I've been feeling for months and didn't have the courage to say." The world tilted again, but this time in a different direction. "What?" "I noticed you 3 months into your assignment," he said quietly. "The way you organize your desk, everything perpendicular and color-coded. The way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating. The way you always bring me coffee at 3 o'clock exactly, without being asked, because you noticed that's when my focus starts to slip." He took a breath. "The way you stayed late on Christmas Eve and never complained, never asked for extra compensation, just helped me, because the work needed doing, and you knew I was stressed. Emma couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was saying. This wasn't possible. CEOs didn't notice their assistants, not like this. Men like Alexander Hartwell didn't fall for women like her. But he was still talking, his words spilling out like he'd been holding them back too long, and the dam had finally broken. I told myself it was inappropriate, that you worked for me, that there was a power dynamic, that I was too old for you, that you deserved someone better. Someone who wasn't married to his work, who didn't have a reputation for being cold and impossible. I convinced myself you couldn't possibly see me as anything other than your boss. And then I read page 47. He laughed, a short, rough sound without humor. You wrote that you dream about my hands, Emma, the way they move when I'm explaining something. Do you know how many times I've caught myself wanting to touch you? Your hand when you pass me documents. Your shoulder when you're leaning over my desk, pointing out schedule conflicts. The strand of hair that always escapes your bun by the end of the day. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. I dream about you too. Every single night. The resignation letter slipped from Emma's fingers, falling to the floor with a soft rustle that seemed impossibly loud. Her mind was racing, trying to reconcile this confession with everything she thought she knew about him, about them, about the careful professional distance they'd maintained. You never said anything, she managed. You never even hinted, because I couldn't, he interrupted. Because you work for me. Because saying something would have put you in an impossible position. If you didn't feel the same way, you'd have felt obligated to quit. And I couldn't bear the thought of you leaving. So I kept quiet. I stayed professional. I buried everything I felt and tried to be satisfied with just having you nearby. He moved to the window, looking out at the city spread below them. The morning sun caught in his hair, turning the silver to white gold. But then I read your diary, and I realized we've both been hiding, both been lonely, both been dreaming about something that was right in front of us the whole time. He turned back to her. So here's what I'm proposing. Don't resign. Take the week off, with full pay. Think about what you want. Not what's professional or appropriate or safe. What you actually want. And then, if you decide you want to explore this, whatever this is between us, we'll figure out the ethics and the logistics and all the complicated parts together. Emma found her voice, though it came out shaky. And if I decide I can't, if it's too complicated, then you come back to work and we never speak of this again, he said simply. I give you my word. No awkwardness, no retaliation, no weirdness. We go back to how things were. Or if you can't do that, I'll write you the best reference letter ever written and help you find a new position somewhere else. Your choice, Emma. Completely your choice. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Emma felt tears prick her eyes. This was the opposite of every fear she'd had about vulnerability. He wasn't laughing at her, wasn't rejecting her, wasn't using her feelings against her. He was giving her space, giving her power, giving her the choice she'd thought she'd lost when she accidentally sent that email. Why are you being so kind? She whispered. Why aren't you angry that I wrote those things about you? Alexander moved closer again, and this time Emma didn't step back. Because you saw me, he said softly. In all those pages, you saw the real me. Not the reputation, not the position, not the armor. You wrote about how I tap my pen when I'm thinking, how I get that line between my eyebrows when I'm frustrated, how I stay late because I don't have anywhere else I want to be, how I take my coffee black because my father taught me that sugar is a weakness, and even now, 10 years after his death, I can't break the habit. His voice caught slightly. You saw all of it, Emma. The loneliness, the walls, the fear. And you didn't judge it. You understood it. How could I be angry about that? A tear slipped down Emma's cheek before she could stop it. Alexander's hand moved as if to wipe it away, then hesitated, hovering in the air between them. "May I?" he asked softly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His thumb was gentle against her cheek, catching the tear, and the touch sent electricity through every nerve ending. His hand was warm, slightly rough, exactly as she'd imagined in all those diary entries she'd written in the safety of her apartment. But this was real. This was happening. "I'm scared," Emma admitted, her voice barely audible. "I'm really scared." "I know," Alexander said, his hand still cupping her face. "So am I. But Emma, I've been scared and alone for a long time. I think maybe it's worth being scared together." His thumb traced her cheekbone, a feather-light touch that made her breath catch. "Take the week, think about it. And whatever you decide, I'll respect it. I promise." She wanted to be brave, wanted to close the distance between them, to kiss him the way she'd imagined 100 times. But courage was a muscle she'd let atrophy, and old fears died hard. So instead, she just nodded and stepped back, breaking the contact between them. Alexander's hand dropped to his side, and she saw disappointment flicker across his face before he schooled his expression back to neutrality. "I'll think about it," she said, proud that her voice came out steady. "Thank you for being understanding, for not making this worse than it already is." "Emma," he said as she turned toward the door. She paused, looking back. "For what it's worth, page 47 was the most beautiful thing anyone has ever written about me, dream or otherwise." The words settled in her chest, warm and impossibly tender. She didn't trust herself to respond, so she just grabbed her bag from her desk and left, riding the elevator down in a daze. Outside, the city was waking up, people rushing to work, cars honking, the smell of coffee and exhaust mixing in the morning air. Emma walked without direction, eventually finding herself at Cary Park, the overlook where tourists came to photograph the skyline. She sat on a bench and pulled out her diary from her bag. She always carried it, a habit she'd never broken. Emma stared at the blank page, pen hovering, trying to find words for the chaos inside her. Finally, she wrote. He read it, and he didn't run. He said he dreams about me, too. How is this possible? How is any of this real? She paused, then added, I've spent my whole life hiding because I thought being seen meant being hurt. But maybe I've had it backwards. Maybe hiding is what hurts. Maybe being seen is what heals. The words looked fragile on the page, tentative, like they might disappear if she didn't believe them hard enough. Emma closed the diary and looked out at the city, at the glass tower where Alexander was probably already in meetings, being brilliant and demanding, and carrying his own armor that maybe, just maybe, weighed as much as hers. She spent the week in a strange, suspended state, caught between terror and hope. She couldn't decide which feeling was stronger, which would win out. Maya called twice, concerned about her sudden absence, and Emma made vague excuses about a stomach bug. She couldn't explain the truth yet, couldn't put into words something she barely understood herself. Instead, she spent her days reading, walking through the city, sitting in cafes watching people, and writing. She wrote more in that week than she had in months, filling pages with her confusion and fear, and the dangerous flutter of possibility that kept growing despite her best efforts to suppress it. On the third day, she found herself researching Alexander Hartwell. She'd never done it before, had deliberately avoided looking him up beyond what was necessary for work. But now she wanted to understand him, to see if the glimpses he'd shown her were real or just careful performance. What she found surprised her: articles about the company's success, his business acumen, his reputation for being ruthless in negotiations. but also smaller pieces, things she had to dig for. A charity he funded anonymously for foster children only revealed when a reporter had connected the dots, a college scholarship program he'd established in his mother's name after she died of cancer when he was 19. An interview from years ago where he'd said, "Success is easy, connection is hard. I've mastered one and failed completely at the other." There were photos too. Alexander at charity galas, always alone or with business associates, never with a date. Alexander receiving an award, his smile not reaching his eyes. Alexander at his father's funeral 5 years ago, standing apart from the crowd, his face a mask of controlled grief. Emma studied that photo for a long time, seeing in his isolation a mirror of her own. They'd both learned early that showing vulnerability was dangerous, that armor was safer than openness. They'd both chosen loneliness over risk, and they'd both been slowly suffocating under the weight of their own protection. On the 5th day, Maya cornered her at a coffee shop, having tracked her down through a combination of persistence and knowing Emma's habits too well. "Okay, spill," Maya demanded, sliding into the chair across from her. "You've been weird all week, and don't tell me it's a stomach bug because I saw you eat an entire croissant just now." Emma wanted to deflect, to change the subject, but the words came out before she could stop them. "I accidentally sent my diary to my boss, the pages where I wrote about having dreams about him." Maya's eyes went wide. "Oh my God, Emma, what happened? Did he fire you? Did you quit?" Emma shook her head, staring into her coffee cup. "Worse. He said he feels the same way. He said he dreams about me too." There was a beat of silence, then Maya said carefully, "Emma, honey, I love you, but that's not worse. That's literally the best possible outcome." "Is it?" Emma looked up, and she knew her face showed all the fear she'd been carrying. "Maya, what if I let myself hope? What if I let myself feel this, and it all falls apart? What if I'm not enough? What if he realizes I'm boring and too intense and not interesting enough? What if—" "Stop," Maya interrupted firmly. "Stop borrowing disaster from the future. You've been alone for so long because you're terrified of being left. But Emma, everyone is afraid of that. Everyone. The question isn't whether you might get hurt. The question is whether the possibility of something real is worth the risk." Emma's throat tightened. "I don't know if I'm brave enough." "You are," Maya said softly. "You've been brave your whole life. You've survived everything life threw at you, all alone. Maybe it's time to try being brave together with someone else." The words echoed Alexander's. "Maybe it's worth being scared together." Emma pulled out her diary, opened to page 47, and showed it to Maya. Her friend read it slowly, her expression softening. "Emma, this is beautiful. If someone wrote this about me, I'd marry them on the spot." "It's too much," Emma protested. "It's too intense, too revealing." "It's honest," Maya corrected. "And that man, your boss, Alexander Hartwell, the guy who could have anyone, read this and said he feels the same way. Don't you think that means something?" Emma went home that night and stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to wear to work the next day. Everything looked wrong. Too professional or too casual, too trying or not trying enough. Finally, she chose a soft gray dress she'd bought months ago and never worn, something that made her feel like herself, but also, somehow, brave. She spent an hour on her hair, leaving it down for once instead of pulled back, the dark blonde waves falling past her shoulders. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked open, vulnerable, hopeful, terrified, but ready. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office at 7:30, her usual time, her heart pounding so hard she felt lightheaded. Alexander's office was dark. He wasn't here yet. which gave her time to settle at her desk, to breathe, to gather her thoughts. She'd written what she wanted to say in her diary last night, practicing the words until they felt right. But when she heard the elevator ding at 8:30 and saw him step out, every rehearsed phrase evaporated from her mind. He stopped when he saw her, his hand tightening on his briefcase. He looked like he hadn't slept well, shadows under his gray eyes. But when he saw her sitting there, something in his expression shifted. Hope. Cautious but unmistakable. "Emma," he said, and her name in his voice still did impossible things to her heartbeat. "You came back." She stood up, her hands trembling slightly. "I need to talk to you. Can we?" She gestured toward his office. He nodded immediately, moving to unlock the door. They walked inside together, and the click of the door closing felt different this time. Not like a barrier, but like privacy, like safety. Alexander set down his briefcase, but didn't move toward his desk. Instead, he stood there, waiting, giving her space to speak first. Emma took a breath, gathering courage from somewhere deep inside herself. "I've spent my whole life being afraid," she said quietly. "Afraid of being seen. Afraid of being known. Afraid that if I let anyone close, they'd realize I'm not enough and leave. And so I hid. I built walls. I wrote everything I felt in a diary because pages can't reject you." She met his eyes, holding his gaze, even though every instinct screamed to look away. "But you read my diary, and you didn't laugh. You didn't run. You didn't use it against me. You just saw me, really saw me. And instead of it being the worst thing that ever happened, it might be the best thing. Because now I know I'm not alone. Now I know you've been lonely too. That you understand what it's like to hide behind armor, because it's safer than being vulnerable." Alexander's expression was intensely focused, like he was memorizing every word. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm still scared. Terrified, actually. But I realized something this week. I've been scared and alone for years, and it hasn't protected me from pain. It's just guaranteed that I'll always be lonely. So maybe it's time to try something different. Maybe it's time to be scared and together instead of scared and alone." The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility. Then Alexander said softly, "Emma, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we explore what's between us, I can't be your boss anymore. The power dynamic is too complicated. I won't put you in a position where you feel you can't say no to me, where your job security depends on my feelings." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "So here's what I'm proposing. I'll arrange a transfer. You'd report to Sarah in operations. Same level, same pay. But you wouldn't work directly for me anymore. It removes the ethical complication and gives us both freedom to figure this out without conflicts of interest." Emma felt something tight in her chest loosen. He'd thought about this, had planned for the complications, was trying to protect her even as he admitted his feelings. "You'd give up having me as your assistant?" "I'd rather have you as something more than an assistant," he said simply. "If that's what you want too." It was. She knew it was. Had known it since she walked into the office this morning. Maybe had known it for months before her laptop betrayed her. But saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff, trusting that someone would catch her. "I want that," Emma said, and her voice only shook a little. "I want to try. With you." The smile that spread across Alexander's face was unlike anything she'd ever seen from him. It was unguarded, genuine, transforming his usually stern features into something warm and almost boyish. "Yeah?" "Yeah," she confirmed, and felt her own smile answer his. He took a step toward her, then hesitated. Would it be all right if I?" He gestured vaguely, and Emma realized he was asking permission to touch her, to close the distance between them. The consideration, the care in making sure she was comfortable, made her heart squeeze. "Yes," she said softly. "Please." Alexander closed the space between them in 2 strides, and then his hands were cupping her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones, the way he'd done once before. Except this time, there was no hesitation, no professional distance. His gray eyes searched hers, and Emma saw everything she'd written about in page 47 reflected back at her. The loneliness, the hope, the desperate desire to be known. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said quietly, "if that's okay." "It's more than okay," Emma whispered, and then his mouth was on hers, and the world narrowed to just this. The taste of coffee, and something uniquely him, the gentle pressure of his lips, the way his hand slid from her face into her hair. The kiss was tender, careful, like he was afraid she might break or disappear. Emma's hands found his chest, felt the rapid beat of his heart under her palms, and realized he was as nervous as she was, as overwhelmed by this shift from professional distance to intimate connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for 8 months, he admitted, his voice rough. "Every time you brought me coffee and smiled that little smile, every time you stayed late without complaining, every time you understood what I needed before I had to ask, I wanted to kiss you so badly I had to grip my desk to keep from doing it." Emma laughed, a shaky sound of relief and joy. "I wanted you to. I used to imagine it, what it would feel like, if your lips were as soft as they looked." "And?" he asked, pulling back just enough to see her face. "Better," she said honestly. "So much better than I imagined." They stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other, adjusting to this new reality where they could touch, could want, could admit the things they'd both been hiding. Then Alexander said, "We should probably be practical for a minute." Emma groaned. "Do we have to?" "Unfortunately," he said, but he was smiling, and his hands were still in her hair, like he couldn't quite bring himself to let go. "I'll talk to Sarah this morning about the transfer. It'll take a few days to arrange the paperwork, make it official. In the meantime, we should probably maintain professional boundaries here at the office. Not because I want to, but because people will talk if they see us together like this, and I want to protect your reputation." Emma appreciated the consideration, even as part of her wanted to throw caution away entirely. "Okay, professional at work." "But," Alexander continued, and his voice dropped lower, more intimate, "would you have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere, not related to work, where we can just be Alexander and Emma, figuring this out." "I'd like that," Emma said softly. "I'd really like that." He kissed her once more, quick and sweet, then stepped back. "I should let you get to work before someone comes looking for me, and finds us like this." Emma nodded, smoothing her dress, trying to compose herself. But as she turned toward the door, Alexander caught her hand. "Emma, thank you for being brave, for coming back, for giving us a chance." Dinner that night was at a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where locals went and tourists never found. Alexander had reserved a corner table, private and dimly lit, away from curious eyes. Emma arrived first, nervous energy making her 5 minutes early despite her best efforts to time it perfectly. She wore a deep green dress she'd had in her closet for years, saved for special occasions that had never quite materialized. Tonight felt special enough. When Alexander walked in, he wasn't wearing a suit. Instead, dark jeans and a gray sweater that made his eyes look more silver than gray. He looked younger somehow, less CEO, and more just man, and Emma's breath caught at the sight of him. "Hi," he said, sliding into the chair across from her, and there was a shyness in his smile that she'd never seen before. "Hi," she replied, feeling her own nervous smile answer his. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and Emma felt the strangeness of it. 24 hours ago, she'd been his assistant. Now she was on a date with him, and the shift felt both impossible and completely natural at the same time. "I'm terrible at this," Alexander admitted suddenly. "At dating. At being personal instead of professional. I haven't done this in I don't even know how long." The confession made Emma relax slightly. "Me either. My last date was 2 years ago. He spent the entire evening talking about cryptocurrency and his ex-girlfriend, in that order." Alexander laughed, genuine and warm. "That's impressively bad." "What's your worst date story?" Emma asked, leaning forward. He considered, swirling the wine the waiter had poured. "I went on a blind date once, set up by well-meaning friends. She spent the first 20 minutes asking about my net worth, the next 20 explaining how she'd redecorate my house if we got serious, and the last 20 describing her dream wedding in excruciating detail. I left during dessert and never let anyone set me up again." They fell into conversation easily after that, trading stories, filling in the gaps in each other's knowledge. Emma learned that Alexander had studied architecture in college before family pressure pushed him into business, that he still sketched building designs sometimes when he couldn't sleep, that his mother's death had fractured something in his relationship with his father that never healed. Alexander learned that Emma had wanted to be a writer, that she still wrote short stories sometimes and kept them in a folder on her laptop, that she'd moved to Seattle 5 years ago to escape the small town where everyone knew everyone's business and she'd never quite fit in. "Why did you become an assistant if you wanted to be a writer?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious. Emma pushed her pasta around her plate, considering. "Because writing requires vulnerability. You put your work out there and people judge it, criticize it, tear it apart. And I'd already had enough of that in my life. Being an assistant let me be useful, competent, necessary, even, without having to expose any real part of myself. It was safe." She looked up at him. "But safety is lonely." "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." The conversation shifted, growing deeper as the restaurant slowly emptied around them. Alexander talked about the pressure of inheriting his father's company, how he'd spent years trying to prove himself worthy while simultaneously resenting the obligation. Emma talked about watching her mother shrink after her father left, how she'd vowed never to let anyone have that power over her, never to need someone so much that losing them would break her. They were both, they realized, survivors of their own fear, shaped by old wounds into people who protected themselves so well they'd nearly protected themselves right into permanent isolation. "Can I ask you something?" Alexander said as they shared tiramisu, his fork occasionally stealing bites from her side of the plate. "Page 47 mentioned dreaming about me every night. What kind of dreams?" Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Do you really want to know?" "I really want to know." She took a breath, deciding that if they were doing this, they should do it honestly. Sometimes they were simple things. You smiling at me, really smiling, not the professional version. Us having coffee together and talking about anything other than work. Walking through the city, your hand in mine. Other times, she paused, her face definitely red now. They were more intense. You kissing me, touching me, looking at me the way you're looking at me right now. Like I matter. Like I'm not invisible. Alexander's expression had gone very still, very focused. "Emma, you've never been invisible to me. Not once. Do you know what I see when I look at you?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "I see someone who's brilliant at organizing chaos, who anticipates needs before they're spoken, who's kind, even when kindness isn't required. I see someone who notices everything, the way I take my coffee, the way I tap my pen, the way my voice changes when I'm stressed. I see someone who wrote the most beautiful, honest words I've ever read, who had the courage to feel things deeply even when it scared her." He reached across the table, lacing his fingers with hers. "I see someone I dream about too. Every single night." The walk back to Emma's apartment happened in a daze of conversation and comfortable silences, their hands linked like teenagers, both of them grinning like fools. When they reached her building, Alexander walked her to the door, but didn't presume to come up. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly. "For dinner. For letting me see you outside of work. For being real with me." "Thank you for asking," Emma replied. "For planning this. For making me feel like taking a risk was worth it." He cupped her face, kissing her slowly, thoroughly, until Emma's knees went weak and she had to grip his sweater to stay upright. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark, pupils blown wide. "I should go before I forget all my good intentions about taking this slow." Emma surprised herself by saying, "What if I don't want you to take it slow?" Alexander's breath caught. "Emma, I'm not saying right now," she clarified quickly, though part of her wondered why not. "But I'm saying soon. I'm saying I don't want to wait forever because we're both overthinking this. I'm saying that I trust you, that I want you, and that life's too short to be scared of good things." He kissed her again, harder this time, pressing her gently against her door, and Emma felt heat pool low in her belly, desire mixing with affection, mixing with trust in a combination she'd never experienced before. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange duality. At work, Emma transferred to the operations department under Sarah's supervision, which turned out to be a relief. Sarah was organized, straightforward, and didn't ask questions about why Emma had suddenly wanted to move. At the office, Emma and Alexander maintained professional distance. They passed each other in hallways with neutral nods. They sat in different areas during meetings. They were careful, appropriate, giving no one reason to gossip. But outside work, they lived in an entirely different world. They had dinner 3 more times. They went to a bookstore where Alexander admitted he'd been secretly reading romance novels to try to understand what women wanted, which made Emma laugh so hard she cried. They went to the art museum on a rainy Sunday and spent 3 hours wandering through exhibits, Alexander surprising her with his knowledge of architecture and design, Emma surprising him with her insights into color theory and emotional impact. They talked constantly, filling in years of history, learning each other's quirks and preferences and dreams. Emma learned that Alexander was actually funny when he relaxed, that he did a terrible impression of their CFO, that he sang off-key in the shower and didn't care. Alexander learned that Emma spoke fluent Spanish from a college semester abroad, that she was secretly afraid of birds after a traumatic encounter with a goose at age 8, that she cried during pet food commercials. They were building something, brick by brick, word by word, and Emma felt the walls she'd spent years constructing slowly coming down, replaced by something better. Trust. Partnership. Love, though neither of them had said the word yet. It was the 3rd Friday night, 3 weeks after the diary incident that changed everything, when things shifted again. They'd had dinner at Alexander's place, a penthouse apartment that was exactly as expensive and impressive as Emma expected, though warmer than she'd imagined. He'd cooked, which surprised her, making pasta from scratch and explaining that his mother had taught him before she died. They'd eaten on his balcony overlooking the city, drinking wine and watching the sun set behind the mountains. When they moved inside, settling on his couch with coffee, Emma found herself studying his face in the soft light, memorizing the angle of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the silver in his hair that caught the light. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked, catching her staring. Emma considered deflecting, but they'd promised each other honesty. "I'm thinking about page 47, about all the things I wrote, all the things I wanted." And his voice had dropped lower, that intimate tone that made her skin feel too sensitive. "And I'm thinking that I still want them. All of them." She set down her coffee cup, turning to face him fully. "Alexander, I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to be careful anymore. I want you. Now. Tonight. If you want that, too." His expression went very still, very intense. "Emma, are you sure? We don't have to rush. I can wait as long as you need." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I've spent my whole life waiting for the right moment, the safe moment, the moment when I'd be brave enough. But I'm learning that brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. And right now, I'm scared and hopeful and wanting you so badly I can barely think straight. So, yes, I'm sure." Alexander leaned forward, kissing her softly, questioningly. "Tell me if anything's too much, if you need to stop, if you need to slow down. Promise me." "I promise," Emma whispered against his lips. "But Alexander? Stop worrying and kiss me properly." He laughed, low and warm, and then his hands were in her hair and his mouth was on hers, and Emma stopped thinking entirely. They moved to his bedroom in a tangle of kisses and whispered words, Alexander pausing every few moments to ask if she was okay, if this was okay, if she wanted to continue. Each time, Emma answered with kisses and touches, showing him with her body what words couldn't fully express. When they finally came together, skin against skin, Alexander moved slowly, carefully, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "So beautiful, Emma. I've wanted this, wanted you, for so long." Emma arched into him, her breath catching at the sensation, at the intimacy of it, at the way his body fit against hers like they'd been designed for each other. It wasn't perfect, wasn't the seamless choreography of movie scenes. They fumbled occasionally, laughed at awkward moments, adjusted positions with whispered directions. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was exactly what Emma had dreamed about on all those lonely nights, with only her diary for company. Afterward, they lay tangled. Together, Alexander's arm around her, Emma's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to normal. "Are you okay?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Better than okay," Emma said honestly. "I'm happy. Actually, genuinely happy." "Good," he said, pulling her closer. "Because I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to freak out." Emma propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "That's a concerning opening." He traced his finger down her arm, his expression serious but soft. "I'm in love with you, Emma. I think I have been for months. Maybe since that Christmas Eve when you stayed late and never complained. Maybe since the first time you brought me coffee without being asked. I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring this out. But I need you to know. I love you." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you too," she said, and the words felt like freedom, like flying, like finally letting herself want something and believing she might actually get to keep it. "I think I've loved you since you read page 47 and didn't run, since you saw all of me and stayed." They kissed again, slow and sweet, and Emma felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, probably always would be on some level, but it wasn't in control anymore. Hope was stronger now. Trust was stronger. Love was stronger. The next 6 months were the happiest of Emma's life. She and Alexander navigated their relationship with the same care and intention they brought to everything else. They were discreet at work, not hiding exactly, but not advertising either. Eventually, the secret came out naturally when they showed up to the company holiday party together, and to Emma's surprise, most people were supportive. A few raised eyebrows, sure, but nothing worse than that. Sarah, her new boss, actually hugged her and said she'd suspected for months. Maya was insufferably smug about having been right about taking risks. Emma's life expanded in ways she hadn't expected. She started sharing her writing with Alexander, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as he read each piece carefully and offered thoughtful feedback. She submitted a short story to a literary magazine, her first submission in 5 years, and when they accepted it, she cried in Alexander's arms from sheer disbelief and joy. He framed the acceptance letter and hung it in his office, telling anyone who asked that his girlfriend was a brilliant writer. The pride in his voice made Emma feel like she could do anything. Alexander changed too, softening in ways his employees noticed. He smiled more, laughed occasionally in meetings, seemed less distant and more approachable. He still had high standards, still drove hard bargains, but the cold edge had worn away, replaced by something warmer. At home, he was entirely different from his CEO persona. He cooked elaborate meals, while Emma sat on the counter reading him passages from her current writing project. He left sticky notes with terrible jokes around her apartment. He drew sketches of building designs and dreamed out loud about maybe, someday, pursuing architecture again, as more than just a hobby. They had their first real fight 4 months in, about something stupid. Emma couldn't even remember what afterward. But it terrified her. That old fear surging up that this was it. He'd see she was too much or not enough, and leave. She'd started to shut down, to retreat behind her walls, when Alexander caught her hand and said, "No, we're not doing that. We're not running. We're fighting, and then we're fixing it. And then we're staying. That's what love means." They'd worked through it, messily but honestly, and came out stronger on the other side. Emma learned that conflict didn't mean ending, that people could disagree and still love each other, that staying was a choice you could make even when things got hard. On a crisp October evening, 6 months after that fateful diary email, Alexander took Emma back to where it all started. Not the office, but his apartment, specifically his study where he'd first read page 47. Emma hadn't been in this room much. Alexander used it for work-from-home days, and she'd respected his space. But tonight, he led her inside, and she noticed immediately that something was different. The desk was cleared, and in the center sat a burgundy leather journal, identical to her diary, except brand new, unmarked. "What's this?" Emma asked, running her fingers over the soft leather. "Open it," Alexander said quietly. She did, and on the first page, in Alexander's precise handwriting, was an entry dated 3 days after he'd read her diary. "I read page 47 today, and my entire world shifted. Emma wrote that she dreams about me every night, that she sees past my armor, that she understands my loneliness. And I realized I've been dreaming about her too, every single night, and was too afraid to admit it. This is my promise to myself. If she's brave enough to come back, I'll be brave enough to tell her the truth, that she's not alone, that I see her too, that maybe we can be less lonely together." Emma's vision blurred with tears. She turned the page. There were more entries, one for each day they'd been together. Small observations, the kind she'd written about him. Emma laughs with her whole body when something really funny happens. She tucks her hair behind her ear when she's nervous. She believes in me in a way no one else ever has. The entries went on, page after page, filling 6 months of falling in love. Emma looked up at Alexander, tears streaming down her face. You kept a diary. About us. About me. You showed me your heart on page 47, he said softly. I wanted to show you mine too. All of it. Every day. He took her hand, leading her to sit on the couch in his study. Emma, 6 months ago, you accidentally sent me the most beautiful gift I've ever received. You showed me that I wasn't alone, that someone else understood what it meant to hide behind armor, to be lonely in a crowded room, to want connection but be terrified of it. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Emma's breath stopped. I know it hasn't been that long. I know some people would say it's too fast. But Emma, I've spent most of my adult life being careful, being safe, waiting for the right moment. And you taught me that the right moment is when you find someone who makes you want to stop waiting. Someone who sees you completely and loves you anyway. Someone who makes you believe in futures and tomorrows and possibilities. He opened the box, revealing a simple ring with a small diamond that caught the light. Emma, I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're choosing me the way I choose you. Will you marry me? Emma couldn't speak through the tears, so she just nodded frantically, holding out her shaking hand. Alexander slid the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything between them had come to fit perfectly through patience and risk and choosing each other every day. Yes, Emma finally managed to say. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. They held each other for a long time, not speaking, just being together in the room where their story had really begun. Finally, Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes. I need to write this down, she said. In my diary, the way you proposed, this feeling. Actually, Alexander said, smiling, I was hoping we could write it down together, in our diary. Not yours or mine, but ours. He pulled out a third journal, this one dark green leather. On the cover, in gold letters, was engraved, Emma and Alexander. We can take turns writing entries, share our thoughts, our dreams, our daily lives. Build a record of our story together. Emma loved the idea, loved the symbolism of it, the way it honored how they'd found each other while creating something new together. They spent the rest of the evening curled up on the couch, taking turns writing the first entry in their shared diary, their handwriting intermingling on the page like their lives had intermingled. Emma wrote about the fear that had kept her alone for so long and the courage it took to let someone in. Alexander wrote about reading page 47 and realizing that the woman he'd been trying not to love had been dreaming about him too. Together, they wrote about building something beautiful from accidental exposure, about how the worst moment of Emma's life had become the beginning of the best chapter for both of them. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at that Italian restaurant where they'd had their first real date. Only close friends and family attended, maybe 30 people total, but it felt perfect. Emma wore a simple cream dress and carried her diary as she walked down the aisle because Alexander had suggested it, saying it was what brought them together and should be part of their joining. When they exchanged vows, Emma spoke from the heart. I spent most of my life hiding because I thought being seen meant being hurt. But you taught me that being seen means being loved. You read my most private thoughts and didn't run. You saw all my fears and vulnerabilities and chose to stay. You showed me that the right person doesn't make you smaller. They make you brave enough to be bigger. Alexander's vows were equally raw. Emma, I thought I had to be perfect to be loved. Strong, successful, without weakness. But you taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest, about letting someone see your scars and trusting them not to use them against you. You made me believe I could be human, could make mistakes, could need someone, and still be worthy of love. You saved me from a life of loneliness I didn't even know I was living. There wasn't a dry eye in the restaurant when they kissed, sealing promises they both intended to keep. The first year of marriage brought its own challenges. Emma struggled sometimes with old insecurities, moments when she'd convinced herself she wasn't enough, that Alexander would eventually realize his mistake. In those moments, Alexander would pull out their shared diary and read her his entries about why he loved her, concrete proof that his feelings weren't going anywhere. Alexander had his own struggles, workaholic tendencies that occasionally made Emma feel secondary. In those moments, Emma would remind him gently that she'd fallen in love with the man, not the CEO, and watching him slowly learn to prioritize their life together over corporate success was its own kind of beautiful. Emma's writing career took off in unexpected ways. Her short story collection was published by a small press, and while it didn't make bestseller lists, it found its audience. People wrote to her, saying her words about vulnerability and fear and courage resonated deeply. She started teaching a creative writing workshop on weekends, helping other scared writers find their voices. Alexander supported every step, coming to her readings, talking up her work to anyone who would listen, creating space in their life for her dreams to flourish alongside his. He even started sketching again seriously, taking architecture courses at night, slowly building toward a future where maybe he could transition from business to design. 2 years after that diary email that changed everything, Emma found herself sitting at the desk in their now shared study, Alexander's arms around her from behind, both of them looking at the latest entry in their diary. They'd just come from Emma's first major book signing, where a young woman had approached her nervously. "Your book saved me," the woman had said, tears in her eyes. "I've been hiding for so long, and reading your words about being brave enough to be seen, it made me believe I could try. So, thank you." Emma had hugged her, thinking about how none of this would have happened if her laptop hadn't glitched, if page 47 hadn't ended up in Alexander's inbox, if she hadn't been brave enough to come back to work after being exposed. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The diary thing. The way we started. How messy and terrifying it was?" Emma considered, then shook her head. "I used to think my greatest fear was being seen. But I was wrong. My greatest fear should have been never being seen at all. Never being known. Never finding someone who could look at all my messy, complicated, scared parts and love them anyway." She turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me that. You saw me at my most vulnerable and stayed. You taught me that exposure isn't the same as destruction. Sometimes it's the path to connection." Alexander smiled, that soft smile reserved only for her. "You taught me the same thing. I spent years convinced that showing weakness meant losing respect, that needing someone made me less. But you showed me that strength isn't about being invulnerable. It's about being vulnerable with the right person. And you're my right person, Emma. You always were." They kissed, slow and sweet, and Emma felt grateful for every moment that led them here. The fear, the mistakes, the accidental email that exposed her heart. All of it was worth it for this, for him, for the life they were building together. That night, they wrote together in their shared diary, a ritual they'd maintained through 2 years of marriage. Emma wrote about the book signing, about the woman who said her words mattered. Alexander wrote about watching Emma sign books, about the pride he felt seeing her dreams come true. Together, they wrote about building a life where they could both be fully themselves, where vulnerability wasn't a liability but a gift, where being seen and known and loved was the greatest adventure of all. Emma closed the diary and looked at the burgundy leather journal on the shelf above the desk, her original diary with page 47 that started everything. She'd considered throwing it away once, embarrassed by how exposed it had made her. But now she kept it as a reminder that sometimes the worst thing that could happen is actually the best thing in disguise. That accidental exposure can lead to intentional connection, that the dreams you write about in secret might be shared by someone who's been too afraid to tell you. That love isn't about being perfect or invulnerable or having it all figured out. Love is about being brave enough to be seen, being patient enough to see others, and being committed enough to stay even when it's hard. Emma had spent 27 years hiding in plain sight, keeping her heart locked safely away where it couldn't be hurt. And then she accidentally sent her diary to her CEO, and he read page 47, where she confessed to dreaming about him every night. And instead of her worst fear coming true, she discovered something better than she'd ever imagined. That being fully known by the right person isn't terrifying. It's coming home. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you felt it was worth your time, consider becoming a member for early access to upcoming stories. Your support means everything and helps us continue creating stories about courage, vulnerability, and the beautiful complexity of human connection. And if you felt this story was truly worth listening to, click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference.